I don't even know why I'm telling this, but I need to get it out. My name is Clara, and I'm married, but lately, I feel invisible. David, my husband, is kind in his own way, but our marriage has become a quiet, empty routine. There's no fire, no touch, no words that make me feel seen. I've felt this loneliness for years, but I thought I could ignore it, survive it. Then came the family's New Year's party. Crowded rooms, laughter, champagne, everyone caught up in their own small dramas. And that's when I saw him, Ethan, David's stepbrother. Tall, broad, impossibly handsome, and so distant that he seemed untouchable, like a figure from a dream I wasn't supposed to have. From the moment our eyes met, something shifted inside me. A flutter, a pulse I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. I told myself it was harmless. A glance, a momentary notice, it wasn't action. Yet even in that brief connection, I felt desire, tension, and a dangerous curiosity I couldn't shake. I've replayed that night in my head 1,000 times. Every look, every near touch, every silence, charged and heavy with what could have been. I almost crossed a line I promised I never would. I almost let myself fall into something I knew I shouldn't. And I need to confess, because even though it didn't happen, the temptation, the longing, it's still there. I first noticed Ethan across the room, leaning casually against the doorway, holding a glass of champagne but not really drinking. He wasn't laughing, didn't participate in the chatter around him. He just existed, like a still point in the noise of the party. Something about the way he carried himself, tall, broad-shouldered, yet quiet, pulled my attention immediately. I felt my chest tighten before I even realized I was staring. David was across the room, greeting his cousins, oblivious to my wandering gaze, and I felt a familiar pang of, I don't know, emptiness. I was craving something I hadn't even named. And then our eyes met. Just for a second, but long enough to feel it. Acknowledged, noticed, in a way that made my stomach flip. His gaze was calm, measured, distant, yet something under it felt personal. I looked away quickly, shame rising, telling myself it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I caught myself searching for him again, and he was always there, just on the edge of my awareness. Every so often, our paths would nearly cross, at the snack table, by the piano, in the hallway, and those small, fleeting moments made my heart beat too fast. He never touched me, never moved closer than necessary, yet every motion, every glance felt loaded, as though the air between us had its own weight. I tried to rationalize it. He's family. He's here for the party, nothing more. I was exaggerating the pull, imagining a connection that didn't exist. And yet, I couldn't deny the heat that crawled through my body whenever I caught him watching me, or when our hands brushed accidentally, briefly, on the buffet table. The smallest things became monumental, a tilted head, a half smile, a lingering look that made my skin prickle. I found myself caught in a dangerous daydream. What it would feel like to stand closer, to hear him speak softly just to me, to let myself linger in his presence without warning or guilt. I imagined the warmth of proximity, the intimacy of shared silence, and shivered, half in fear, half in longing. I knew I shouldn't feel this way. I knew what I was thinking was a betrayal in its own right. But my loneliness had left me raw, hungry for any attention that felt real. And he was the first person in months who made me feel alive in that strange, unsettling way. And I wondered, in the deepest, most terrified part of me, if he felt it too, if he noticed the way I looked at him, if he knew what I was thinking, if he wanted something more than what he was allowed to want. The first time I realized how dangerous proximity could feel was in the kitchen. I had gone to grab a drink, thinking I'd escape the crowded room for a moment of solitude, only to find Ethan there, leaning against the counter as if he had been waiting for something. Or maybe just me. I froze, my hand on the handle of the fridge, suddenly aware of every inch of space between us. He looked up and smiled, just a small, polite smile. But there was something in it that made my chest tighten. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining tension where there was none. But the moment stretched too long, my mind filling with all sorts of thoughts I shouldn't have had. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of something I couldn't undo. We spoke briefly, polite small talk about the party, about family, about David. His voice was calm, measured, a low rumble that made the back of my neck tingle. I caught myself leaning in slightly without realizing it, drawn toward him in a way that made my rational mind recoil. The air between us felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. Every pause in the conversation was louder than words, every glance loaded with possibilities I didn't want to consider but couldn't help imagining. I felt the weight of my own desire pressing against the walls of my conscience. I knew it was wrong, wrong in every sense. But the loneliness, the starvation of touch and attention in my marriage made restraint feel like a punishment. I told myself, just notice, just observe, nothing will happen. Yet my body betrayed me. My pulse quickened when he stood closer than necessary, brushed past me by accident, or even when he merely looked at me in that way that felt intimate without touching. I began to rationalize quietly, internally. He's family. He doesn't know me. This isn't cheating. This is just human curiosity. But deep down, I knew I was playing with fire. Every near-accidental touch, every moment of shared space, felt like a test of my own self-control. I was acutely aware of my breathing, my posture, the way my fingers lingered on the counter too long. I caught myself imagining scenarios I shouldn't have allowed myself to imagine. His hand brushing mine, a moment of shared laughter, where our eyes met and lingered, just enough to make the air between us almost unbearable. And in each of these imagined moments, I felt the dangerous pull of possibility, the intoxication of being seen, truly seen, in a way I hadn't felt in years. By the time I left the kitchen, my pulse was racing, my mind a storm of desire and guilt. I had escaped physical contact, yes, but the danger wasn't over. Every glance, every step, every shared space from that moment on became a careful balancing act. I wanted to move closer, to let the tension take me, but I was terrified of losing myself entirely. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about him. He had awakened something in me I hadn't felt in a long time, and the proximity, simple, innocent, accidental, was more electrifying than anything I'd imagined. It started subtly, almost innocuously. Ethan began finding reasons to speak to me, little comments here and there, questions that seemed casual but carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "Did you try the punch?" "That dessert is surprisingly good." Nothing overt, nothing that should have mattered, but the way he said it, the calm certainty in his voice, made me hang on every word. I noticed the slight tilt of his head when he spoke, the softening in his eyes when they found mine, the way his presence seemed to draw the room's energy toward him and, unintentionally, toward me. Every small conversation became a minefield of internal emotion. I was painfully aware of the quiet spaces between words, the pauses where silence itself spoke louder than any sentence could. My mind raced with what-ifs and imagined scenarios, each more dangerous than the last. I told myself constantly, "This is nothing, just attention. You're lonely. It's harmless." But my pulse betrayed me, and my body reacted in ways I couldn't fully control. I noticed how close he stood in group conversations, almost casually, but just within that invisible line of intimacy where mere proximity felt electrifying. When he laughed at something I said, his eyes lingered a second too long, and I felt my face flush, my chest tightening. Every touch of a hand against mine, on the arm, accidentally brushing in passing, sent a shiver through me, that I hated and craved at the same time. I wanted to rationalize it as accident, as normal human closeness, but the depth of longing I felt was undeniable. The most dangerous part wasn't his behavior. It was my imagination filling in every silence, every glance, every slight smile. I imagined private conversations, lingering touches, moments where we could have abandoned restraint entirely. And I realized, with a mix of fear and fascination, that desire was no longer just physical. It had become emotional. I craved his attention, the awareness that he might see me in ways no one else did. I wanted to be noticed, appreciated, desired. But I knew that line, that invisible boundary between temptation and betrayal, was thinner than I ever thought. I caught myself standing a little too close, pretending not to notice the racing of my own heart, aware that he might notice it too. Every word he spoke, even casual remarks about family or plans for the new year, seemed to linger in my mind far longer than they should have. My thoughts were filled with him in a way that terrified me, yet I couldn't stop. By the end of the night, I found myself on the balcony, pretending to check my phone, while he stepped out a moment later. The air between us was thick with unspoken tension. I could feel his presence near me, close but restrained, and the electricity in that silence was unbearable. I imagined leaning just a little, hearing him speak softly, letting the moment stretch endlessly. And then, as quickly as the thought came, I reminded myself of everything at stake. I stepped back, heart pounding, grateful and terrified that I had resisted. Even now, I replay the conversations, the glances, the silence. I almost let myself fall into something I knew I couldn't return from. I almost let desire override reason. And yet, I survived the temptation, if only barely. It happened in a way that was completely unplanned, the kind of moment that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. The party was winding down. Most guests gathered in the living room for the countdown, but I had slipped away to the hallway, needing air, needing space to think. And then he appeared, Ethan, leaning casually against the doorway, the dim light catching the planes of his face, the broad sweep of his shoulders. I froze. There was no plan, no warning, and yet the air between us felt charged, heavy, almost tangible. We were alone for the first time that night, just the two of us in that narrow, quiet space. I felt my pulse jump, my skin prickling, as if my body recognized the danger before my mind fully did. His eyes found mine instantly, calm and unreadable, yet beneath the surface, something flickered. I couldn't tell if it was curiosity, amusement, or the faintest trace of interest. But it made my stomach clench. He took a step closer. Or maybe it was me moving, I can't be sure. The space between us felt impossibly tight, too intimate for the context, and my chest felt like it would burst. I wanted to speak, to say something harmless, to break the tension. But every word I could think of sounded absurd, heavy, inadequate. The silence itself was suffocating, full of all the words we weren't allowed to say, all the touches we couldn't afford. His hand brushed mine, not deliberately, at least I told myself that, but it was enough to make me shiver, enough to make my mind spin with dangerous possibilities. I could almost feel the warmth of him, the proximity that threatened to erase the careful boundaries I'd clung to all night. I imagined leaning closer, hearing him whisper something that only I could hear, surrendering to the pull of all the desire I'd denied myself for so long. And then, in the sharpest instant, I remembered everything at stake. My husband, my life, the fragile line I had promised myself I would never cross. I pulled back slightly, my heart racing, grateful for the sudden clarity, terrified at how close I had come to letting the moment sweep me away. Ethan said something, polite, casual, almost nothing, and I nodded, my voice catching in my throat. The spell broke, just enough to remind me of the consequences waiting in the shadows if I allowed myself to indulge. I watched him step back, the distance between us restored, and yet the tension lingered like a charged wire in the air. I could still feel the phantom warmth of his hand, the pull of his presence, the almost intimacy that hovered and refused to dissipate. Every step he took away from me felt both like relief and loss. I realized then, with a clarity that frightened me, that temptation doesn't always need action to leave its mark. One look, one brush of skin, one shared silence. Those moments can be as consuming as any act of betrayal. I had almost let myself fall, almost let desire override reason, and yet I had survived. Barely. Even now, when I think back, my chest tightens. The memory is vivid, immediate, and terrifying in its intensity. I had come to the edge and stepped back, but the edge is still there, waiting. And I know it won't be the last time. After that moment in the hallway, the rest of the night passed in a blur. I went back to the living room, trying to act as if nothing had happened, but my body refused to calm down. My hands were still slightly trembling from the brush of his hand, my chest still tight from the nearness of him. Every time I caught a glimpse of Ethan across the room, the memory of that hallway hung between us like an invisible thread, taut and vibrating. I felt both exhilarated and terrified. Exhilarated because I had felt something so alive, so immediate, that it reminded me I existed beyond the routine of my marriage. Terrified because I had come so close to a line I had promised myself I would never approach, and I had almost let desire dictate my actions. The dichotomy made me nauseous. How could a single moment, a single near touch, create such intensity? How could it leave me feeling raw, exposed, and dangerously alive, all at once? I sat quietly, pretending to talk to someone, but my mind was elsewhere. I replayed every glance, every gesture, every word, or absence of word, that had made that hallway feel like a world unto itself. I felt guilty for enjoying it, guilty for imagining more, guilty for acknowledging the pull that had shaken me to my core. And yet, I couldn't deny it. My loneliness, my hunger for attention, had met something in him, and it had sparked a fire I hadn't realized was still burning inside me. The danger, I realized, wasn't just in the physical closeness, it was in the emotional vulnerability. Ethan had seen something in me, even if only for a second. He had stirred desire, awareness, longing, all things that had been dormant for far too long. And though nothing happened, that spark lingered, a quiet but persistent presence I could not ignore. It reminded me how fragile restraint can be, how easily temptation can touch a mind and soul without a single act of betrayal. I thought about David, about our life together, and the quiet, aching absence that had made me so susceptible to noticing Ethan in the first place. I felt both shame and clarity. Shame for letting myself entertain the thought, clarity in recognizing that desire does not always lead to action, but it does reveal hidden needs and vulnerabilities. By the end of the night, when the last guests had left and the apartment fell silent, I found a small measure of relief. I had survived the temptation. I had resisted the almost affair that had brushed against my life so dangerously. But even as I lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I could still feel the warmth of that hallway moment, the tension that had vibrated between us, the unspoken connection that had nearly pulled me into something I shouldn't have touched. And I knew, with an unsettling certainty, that this was not over. Ethan's presence, even distant and polite, would haunt me for weeks, months, maybe longer. The tension would return, quietly, unexpectedly, and I would have to decide, again and again, whether to allow it to control me or to step back and preserve the fragile line I had fought so hard to maintain. Even now, thinking back, I can feel the pull of that night, the closeness, the silence, the almost touch. I didn't cross the line, yet the memory lingers, sharp and intoxicating. It taught me something I can't ignore. Desire isn't always physical. Temptation isn't always obvious. And sometimes the most dangerous moments are the ones that almost happen. I survived, but only just. Every glance, every small encounter since then carries the same weight, and I know I will have to confront it again, carefully, every single time. If you've ever felt that quiet, forbidden pull, or the rush of almost crossing a line, I want you to share your experience in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe to hear more confessions that explore the tension, desire, and restraint hiding in plain sight.